Hey guys, tonight we drift back almost 1,000 years into the rolling waterways of Song Dynasty China. You're perched on the edge of a riverbank where the mist curls like steam from a teacup and boats groan against the wooden piers. The year isn't printed on the calendar app in your phone. It's somewhere around the late 10th or early 11th century, when the Song Empire was at its height, bursting with markets, poetry, and more bureaucracy than you would ever want to file paperwork for. The rivers are alive with sound, oars slicing water, fishermen calling, merchants shouting over prices. You probably wouldn't survive here, unless you really enjoy lifting sacks of copper coins heavy enough to give you instant back pain. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And since I'm curious, drop a comment with your location and the local time you're watching this. Are you curled up in bed at midnight? Sneaking a listen during lunch? I'd love to know. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The river is your guide. You float along its surface, the air cool and damp, smelling of mud, carp, and pinewood. Waterways in the Song Empire are not just scenic backdrops. They are highways, moving armies, rice, silk, and yes, far too many coins. You hear the clatter of copper against copper, the endless chiming of wealth as every boat seems to carry barrels and baskets filled with round, square-holed coins strung together with rope. Each string weighs about as much as a small dumbbell, so forget carrying them casually in your sleeve. People lug these strings on their backs, or tie them across donkeys that wobble under the load like exhausted interns at tax season. You see a merchant squatting by the pier, his fingers rough from rope burns. He counts his coins in endless circles of metal, like someone endlessly counting likes on a social post, never quite satisfied. Around him the air smells of wet rope, boiled millet porridge, and fried river fish. The Song people are practical, but they're also dreamers. Poets write verses about dragonflies skipping across water, and at the same time, engineers design bridges sturdy enough to support whole armies. But for now, your eyes settle on the water itself. It carries everything. Barges drift by loaded with salt from coastal flats. Bundles of bamboo stacked so high, they look like green fortresses, and ceramic jars filled with fermented wine that leak just enough to make the air smell faintly sweet. The murmur of the river is like a lullaby, layered with laughter, scolding, haggling, and the slap of waves against wooden hulls. As you drift further, you notice the rhythm of commerce here. A farmer offers rice, a fisherman offers dried carp, and both receive coins, lots of coins. The weight of these transactions presses down on the land itself, roads bending under caravans of copper. You think about your own wallet, slim and unbothered, maybe holding a card or two. Imagine replacing that with 10 kilos of metal swinging against your hip every time you go out to buy dumplings. Romantic? No. Clunky? Absolutely. There's one thing that catches your eye, though. A group of scholars in pale robes sitting cross-legged under a willow tree. They're not sweating under sacks of coins. Instead, they're sketching ideas with brushes on long rolls of bamboo slips. They whisper of new ways to move wealth, ways that don't require so much muscle. One of them laughs softly, as though money could be as light as paper. You almost laugh too. It sounds absurd, like someone suggesting you pay your rent in monopoly bills. Yet here, in the murmuring rivers, seeds of that idea float. But tonight we linger in this moment when coins still rain. You lean close to the clinking strings of copper. Each coin has a square hole in its middle, threaded together in long jangling strands. You can smell the faint metallic tang, almost like blood mixed with rain. The coins themselves are small but multiplied by thousands. They weigh down boats and backs alike. To move a fortune across provinces, merchants hire guards, mules, and sometimes entire mini-armies. The road tolls? Let's just say you'd be broke by the time you arrived. This is where the history gets both fascinating and slightly hilarious. The government is rich in copper, but also perpetually broke from wars, palaces, and yes, a bureaucracy that loved paperwork more than anyone should. Imagine a medieval DMV, except instead of renewing licenses, they're counting coins, and instead of one long line, you have hundreds of them, all jingling like unwanted percussion instruments. A well-known moment from this period plays before you. The Northern Song Court officially mandates the use of copper coins as the empire's backbone. Officials celebrate this as progress, though every donkey in China groans under the weight. You see an imperial decree read aloud in a market square. the words echoing over the sound of chopping knives and clanging pans. Farmers nod dutifully, but you can almost hear their spines crack in protest. And then, tucked between the obvious and the ordinary, comes a quieter fact. In Sichuan, local merchants start doing something unusual. They write down receipts for one another. Slips of paper that promise, yes, you gave me coins, and yes, I'll pay you back. At first, it's just practical bookkeeping, nothing flashy. But these tiny scraps, so easy to lose, so easy to forge, begin to carry trust. And that trust, historians still debate, may have been more valuable than the copper itself. As the night deepens, you hear the croak of frogs and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. Lanterns bob along the riverbank, glowing like fireflies trapped in glass. You step into a riverside tea house, where steam fogs the windows and the air tastes of jasmine leaves. Inside, merchants argue over prices, but you also hear them joke about their aching shoulders from carrying too many coins. One slaps the table and says he'd rather be paid in feathers than in strings of copper. The others laugh, but you sense a wish buried in that laughter. There's an intimacy here. Money is not yet abstract. It's heavy, visible, tangible. You can bite a coin and feel its edge on your teeth. You can smell it like damp stone warmed by sun. Children play with coins as toys, stacking them in little towers before their parents snatch them back with anxious hands. That night, merchants sleep with bags of coins under their pillows, the way you might clutch your phone to make sure it doesn't fall behind the bed. And yet, as you listen closely, the rivers murmur louder, as if hinting at change. Paper hasn't arrived yet, but whispers of it float among the reeds. A poet sitting on the bank dips his brush into ink and muses that wealth should be light, like words carried on the wind. His friend scoffs, pointing to the creak of the boat weighed down with copper. Dreams are nice, but trade is heavy. Still, your senses linger on the dream. The sound of coins echoes in your ears, but beneath it there's something else. A quiet suggestion, a sigh of possibility. You watch the water swirl, carrying reflections of lanterns, stars, and maybe the faint outline of a future where money doesn't clink but rustles, where it doesn't bruise your shoulders, but folds neatly in your sleeve. For now, you breathe in the damp night air. The river flows steady, carrying with it stories, burdens, and the first flicker of something new. The coins clatter, the donkeys groan, and you let yourself drift with the current, where the weight of metal is heavy. But the murmuring promises of the river are lighter than you expect, and as the lanterns fade into the mist, you sense the story carrying you further downstream, toward the burdens those copper coins will soon create. The river has carried you far, but the weight of coins refuses to leave your ears. Last night, you drifted among boats sagging under copper, the metallic chime of strings echoing like a wind chime shop that never, ever closes. Tonight you follow the clatter inland. The murmuring rivers turn into roads, and with them come caravans, long trains of donkeys, mules, and human shoulders bending under the impossible weight of metal wealth. The air here is not thick with mist anymore, but with dust, stirred up by hooves and sandals clinging to your throat until every breath tastes faintly of copper and earth. You walk alongside a merchant caravan. The donkeys look tired, their eyes half closed like students in a morning lecture. They wobble under bales of coins, each sack slapping against their ribs with a steady rhythm. The jingling sound is constant, like someone left a Spotify playlist on loop. Greatest hits of coins. Volume 1. Merchants groan as they adjust the ropes across their shoulders, muttering complaints. One man turns to another, whispering, "Do you think the gods ever get tired of hearing coins clink?" His friend smirks, "Only when you don't pay them enough offerings." The two laugh, but their knees buckle under the next hill. And the joke collapses with them. The sun is sharp on your neck, pressing down like an iron lid. Heat radiates off the coin sacks, warming the air with a metallic tang. You imagine lifting one of those bags, instantly regretting it, like when you tell yourself you'll carry all the groceries in one trip. Spoiler, you can't. Every so often the caravan halts to rest. Coins spill out as men untie sacks, shining in little piles along the roadside. Children dash over, their bare feet slapping the dust, trying to grab one or two before stern mothers call them back. The sound of metal dropping on stone rings sharp, like an accidental cymbal crash in a sleepy orchestra. You sit on a rock, watching the trade. A farmer arrives leading a cart of rice straw. He haggles for payment, eyeing the strings of coins the merchant offers. He frowns. Too heavy. I can't carry that home. The merchant shrugs helplessly. Coins are coins, whether you like them or not. The farmer ties the strings across his ox, muttering curses that you suspect are very creative, even if you don't quite catch every word. What's funny, in a slightly tragic way, is how sophisticated the Song economy actually is. This empire is a machine of markets. Grain, silk, ceramics, iron. City after city hums with trade. But the engine is slowed by the sheer physics of copper. The coins themselves are beautiful, round, cast with neat characters declaring imperial authority, a square hole in the center like a tiny window. They're practical for stringing, but impractical when you have to carry thousands. It's like designing the perfect USB stick, but making it the size of a brick. You pass a roadside inn where merchants gather under a sagging awning. The smell of fried scallion cakes mixes with the sour odor of sweat. Inside, the tables are cluttered not just with bowls, but with heaps of coins. Payment here is loud. Every transaction sounds like someone throwing hardware across the floor. A merchant slaps down a string of coins. The innkeeper bites one, then grumbles, "Fake alloy." "I can taste it," they argue, voices rising with the clink of disputed coins. The well-known historical moment you're watching unfold is this. During the Northern Song, copper coins truly became the lifeblood of the economy, standardized and mandated across the empire. Markets thrived, but the weight of wealth was a national burden. In fact, some records describe caravans so overloaded with coins that bridges groaned under their weight. Picture that, a bridge not buckling under armies, but under the jingling march of money itself. Yet here's a quieter, stranger fact you notice at the roadside. To make carrying easier, people sometimes hid coins inside hollowed-out bamboo poles. Merchants would walk casually with what looked like bundles of firewood, when in fact they carried hundreds of coins. You can imagine the disappointment of an unlucky bandit trying to light a cooking fire with stolen bamboo, only to find coins tumbling out like stubborn beans. The road is long, and as you trudge, you overhear another snippet of weary dialogue. A young merchant sighs, "Do you think someday we'll carry wealth as light as feathers?" An older one snorts, "When roosters learn to read poetry." The group chuckles, but you feel the wistfulness in the younger man's words. The night cools the road. You see fires flickering along the caravan stops, shadows bending against canvas tents. The air smells of smoke and boiled cabbage. Coins are stacked in little towers beside the merchants, watched like sleeping children. The donkeys, finally free of their loads, stretch their necks and groan, as though they too have opinions about economic policy. You try to sleep near the fire, but the ringing of coins continues in your head. Even in silence, the sound follows, metallic, persistent. It is both the lullaby and the chain of this world. The Song Dynasty thrives, yes, but under the weight of its own currency. And though whispers of change float in the air, tonight you still feel the ache of copper pressing into every shoulder, every cartwheel, every mile of dust-covered. Road historians still debate whether these burdens of coinage pushed innovation faster, whether the sheer exhaustion of carrying money forced merchants and officials alike to imagine lighter, more abstract systems. You don't know the answer, but as the road stretches out into the dark, you can sense the question pressing down as heavily as the sacks on the donkeys. The stars glitter above, cool and weightless. You tilt your head back, imagining a future where money could be carried like starlight, not like stone. But for now you roll over on your mat, listening to the restless jingle of wealth, knowing tomorrow the road will demand its burdens again. And just ahead you catch a hint of debate, murmurs from officials beginning to notice the merchants' struggles, voices that will soon weigh in on whether money must always be heavy, or whether it might float impossibly like paper. The road dust is still in your throat when you arrive in Sichuan. The mountains rise like folded green curtains, and the air here is wetter, heavier, scented with pine sap and peppercorn. The caravans have thinned, but the burden hasn't. The coins still jingle, clatter, and spill across tabletops as if the empire can't breathe without that metallic chorus. But here, something feels different. The merchants are clever in ways that surprise even you, and their tired eyes gleam with schemes that weigh less than copper. You step into a marketplace under striped awnings. Red lanterns sway in the breeze, brushing the dust away with a faint papery sound. Merchants squat behind tables stacked with cloth jars of oil, baskets of fruit, You hear the sizzling of peppers in a wok, smell vinegar and garlic wafting from a food stall, and feel the press of the crowd as voices rise like the drone of cicadas. Coins clink, of course, but you notice something subtler. Slips of paper changing hands. Quick, discreet, like secrets folded into palms, a merchant with a beard as wiry as broom bristles waves you closer. His robe smells faintly of ink and oil. He leans in and says, "Too many coins way down the road." I give a slip, I take a slip. Easier than breaking your back. He shows you a rectangle of mulberry paper, the brush strokes sharp and black. It promises that whoever holds it may claim a certain number of coins stored safely with him. Another man overhears and scoffs, "Bah, just words on paper. What if he vanishes tomorrow?" The bearded one shrugs, smiling. "Then you curse my ancestors, but until then you travel light." They both laugh, but you sense the tension. This is where ingenuity sharpens under necessity. Merchants in this region begin issuing their own promissory notes, receipts for deposits of coin meant to be redeemed later. To carry a stack of these slips is to float wealth like a feather instead of dragging it like an anchor. It's not official yet, not sanctioned by the court, but it's real enough that people risk it. You walk deeper into the market, noticing how these notes spread like whispers. A silk dealer accepts one, tucks it into his sleeve, then counts cloth bolts into a basket. A spice seller refuses, demanding hard copper. The argument grows heated. "You trust words too much," the spice seller says, shaking his head. "You trust donkeys too much," the silk dealer shoots back. "Mine won't collapse under the weight of promises." The crowd chuckles, though you can tell half of them side with one, half with the other. By candlelight that night, you join a group of merchants bent over bamboo slips, drafting agreements. The air smells of resin, ink, and sweat. They test phrases, trying to make their slips harder to dispute. One man suggests stamping them with personal seals, red wax pressed into paper. Another mutters about signatures, though few can forge the confident hand of a literate merchant. They argue late into the night, their whispers louder than the crickets outside. You can't help but think it's like watching a startup brainstorm. The energy crackles, half risk, half excitement. One of them even jokes, "If it fails, at least we can use the paper to wrap dumplings." The others laugh, clapping the table, though the sound is tired. The widely known event you're brushing against is this. In the 11th century, especially in Sichuan, private merchants began creating paper drafts and deposit slips, setting the stage for what would later become government-backed notes. It's not yet an empire-wide revolution, but it's a spark. And here's the stranger, lesser-known fact. Some of these early paper slips weren't always plain. A few wealthy guilds experimented with decorative designs, carving patterns into woodblocks to print notes that looked almost festive. Imagine paying your taxes with something that looks like a holiday card. Yeah, it's charming, until you remember the punishment for forgery was often death. Historians still debate how much these private notes circulated beyond local markets. Some say they were confined to merchant networks, trusted only within tight circles. Others argue they began to seep outward, touching ordinary farmers and craftsmen sooner than official records suggest. The truth may be somewhere between, as most truths are. The next day you wander into a tea house buzzing with chatter. The floor is sticky with spilled wine, and the lamps swing slightly in the breeze. A group of merchants sit cross-legged, tossing their slips of paper into a pile like gamblers with playing cards. They laugh, boasting of trades and deals. One man spreads his slips on the table and says, "See? My wealth fits in a sleeve." Another counters, "And one sneeze will blow it away." You sip bitter tea, the taste sharp on your tongue, and realize the debate is alive, fragile, unresolved. Yet in their laughter you hear determination. The weight of copper is unbearable, and ingenuity refuses to bow. Night deepens. Outside, lanterns glow against the mist, their reflections trembling in the canal. You feel the paper in your pocket, smooth, lighter than air, but humming with potential. The coins still clatter in the distance, but their grip feels looser now. You sense the first real step toward change, born not in palaces but in crowded markets, in whispered deals, in the ingenuity of tired merchants who dream of lighter burdens. And just beyond, you catch the faint scratch of brushes, notes being copied, receipts multiplying, fragile beginnings that soon demand more than laughter and trust. They demand rules. You're standing in the cramped backroom of a Sichuan tea house, your shoulders brushing bamboo walls stained with decades of steam. The air smells like damp wood, wet ink, and a little too much garlic frying in the kitchen next door. Merchants are hunched over a low table, their sleeves rolled up, brushes twitching like nervous sparrows. Every scratch of ink on mulberry paper feels louder than it should. And you realize you're watching the fragile birth of something both absurd and ingenious. Money that weighs less than a dumpling wrapper. One man leans close to you, squinting through the lantern haze. See this seal? If it's broken, worthless. If it's whole, it buys salt silk even a donkey. He chuckles, half proud, half terrified. Another merchant mutters, or it buys nothing when the official says it doesn't. They laugh a little too loudly, the way gamblers laugh when they're already down 3 hands. You feel the paper between your fingers, thin as onion skin, yet carrying more value than the sack of coins sitting ignored in the corner. Outside, rain taps on the tiles like impatient fingers, and the room grows warmer with each exhale of men calculating trust like they'd calculate freight weights. Paper, someone grumbles, fanning himself. Lighter than my mother-in-law's gossip. But at least her gossip doesn't get forged. That earns groans and muffled laughs, the kind that spill tea out of cups. A boy runs in with a stack of notes tied by string, fresh from a copyist's brush. He almost trips, and for a moment you imagine history collapsing right there in an ink-splattered mess on the floor. But he steadies himself, sets the bundle down, and a hush settles. Like everyone realizes they've just seen a currency delivery that doesn't need mules, only quick hands. You lean back, noticing the flicker of the lantern throwing shadows of the notes across the wall, fluttering like ghosts of copper coins long gone. At one corner of the room, an older scholar with silver whiskers strokes his beard. The Tang tried this, he says softly, but it scattered like ash. Will the song hold tighter? His question hangs in the smoky air. Historians still debate whether these first promissory notes were truly trusted by all merchants, you think to yourself, or whether they were just desperate experiments, like testing if noodles could double as fishing line. Later that evening, you wander out into the rain-slick market streets. You hear the dripping of eaves, the slap of sandals against mud, and the faint rustle of paper notes being tucked into sleeves instead of chests of coins. Under a willow tree, 2 merchants argue softly. It's faster, safer. You can carry 100 strings of value without a donkey. And when a thief comes, the first man grins. He'll think I'm carrying love letters. You catch yourself smiling because it's not far off. Each note is, in a way, a love letter to trust itself. But whispers are not enough forever. Rules, stamps, and official oversight loom just beyond the horizon. And as you fold your damp sleeve around a slip of paper tonight, you can feel that the game is about to grow bigger, stricter, and far more complicated. You step through the wooden gates of a prefectural office in Sichuan, the rain of last night still clinging to the tiled roofs, dripping in thin silver lines down the carved stone lions. Inside, the air smells of damp scrolls, pine resin from a brazier, and that faint ever-present tang of ink. The floor creaks under your sandals, echoing in the vaulted chamber where officials sit like tired roosters, their hats bobbing as they peer down at stacks of suspiciously light bundles. These aren't scrolls of poetry or tax reports. No, these are notes. The very same feather-thin slips you saw merchants giggling over in tea houses, only now they rest on lacquered tables beneath the stern gaze of men who definitely don't laugh at dumpling jokes. The room buzzes with the scratch of brushes as clerks copy tallies, while outside, the muffled clamor of merchants waiting in the courtyard rises like cicadas. An official clears his throat so sharply it feels like a sword unsheathed. "Gentlemen," he says, voice dripping with both suspicion and excitement, "if these notes are to spread, they must carry the weight of the state." Another official mutters, "Or they'll scatter like ash just as in the Tang." His voice trails, but the point slices through the room. The atmosphere thickens. You smell hot tea poured nervously into cups, steam rising like ghosts of copper coins. The officials whisper about control, about seals, about punishment for forgery. One slams his palm on the table, rattling porcelain. A counterfeit note is no different from treason. The silence afterward is heavier than a chest of bronze. From the courtyard, a merchant's voice drifts in. "Then perhaps your seal should be harder to copy than my grandmother's handwriting." Snickers ripple, quickly silenced by a guard's glare. Still, the sarcasm clings in the air like wood smoke. You notice how the paper itself seems to tremble in lantern light, its fragility magnified against all this rigid authority. A younger clerk whispers, "Why not make each note with multiple stamps like doors within doors?" His senior scoffs, "And how many doors must a man unlock to buy salt?" The two glare at each other like squabbling crows until the prefect raises a hand. You can almost feel the bureaucratic machinery whirring to life, slow but relentless. It's the same machinery that once catalogued every household for taxes, that drafted men to guard the Grand Canal, that kept record of floods and famines stretching back generations. And now it's about to grab paper money by the ink-smudged collar and drag it into the official world. The wider empire begins to stir. You hear travelers in roadside inns debating whether the capital, Kaifeng, will approve these paper experiments. One whispers that soldiers in the border provinces are already being offered notes in place of coins. Lighter to carry on campaign, though many grumble they'd rather be paid in sacks of millet. You smell fried scallion pancakes at the next table, hear the slurp of noodles, while the men mutter about loyalty and trust as if they were debating sources instead of salaries. Historians still debate whether the Song government's early involvement was more about solving coin shortages or tightening control over unruly merchants. You lean back against the inn's timber wall, feeling the heat of the stove behind you, and realize both reasons probably mattered. Then comes the turning point you can almost taste in the air: official recognition. The Sichuan office begins to issue government-backed jiaozi, paper notes stamped with authority so bold they almost feel heavier than copper. The first widely recognized paper currency in the world. You watch clerks line them up to dry on bamboo racks, rows of promises fluttering in the draft like drying laundry. But of course, bureaucracy can't resist meddling. Taxes must be paid in these notes, rules drafted in brushstrokes so tight they squeak. A merchant sighs beside you, whispering, "The government has noticed our toy, and now it is no longer ours." At night, under flickering oil lamps, you overhear two weary officials talking over their rice bowls. "Do you think people will trust it?" "They'll have no choice once we decree it." "That doesn't sound like trust." The first man shrugs, chewing. "It sounds like governance." Outside, the wind tugs at your sleeve, carrying with it the faint rustle of mulberry paper. You realize the notes are no longer love letters or gambling slips. They've become something heavier, something backed by the full weight of the empire. And though the ink still smells fresh, you can already sense the tug-of-war brewing between those who want freedom and those who demand control. The night deepens, and as the last clerk snuffs out a candle, you catch yourself wondering what will happen when the government's embrace turns into a grip too tight to breathe. You find yourself in Chengdu, the air damp with river mist, the streets alive with a steady shuffle of sandals over stone. The morning smells of fried crullers dipped in sesame oil, pine smoke curling from rooftop chimneys, and ink so sharp it stings your nose. It's here in this bustling Sichuan city that the first government-backed paper money, the jiaozi, is being born. Not in a quiet scholar's study, but in offices where brushstrokes meet decree and where merchants reluctantly line up like students forced into morning drills. The prefectural office is louder now than when you last visited. Clerks in thin robes scurry like ants, their brushes scratching against mulberry paper, while wooden seals thud down with the force of small gongs. You lean closer and hear the faint squelch of ink pressed deep into fibers, a sound oddly satisfying like the crinkle of opening a new bag of chips. Outside, the crowd hums with restless energy, umbrellas dripping, merchants fanning themselves with folded receipts, arguing in voices that rise and fall like sparrows fighting over crumbs. "This slip," one merchant mutters to you, waving a fresh jiaozi like it's cursed, claims to equal 70 strings of copper. He shakes it so hard the paper flutters dangerously. 70? Do you see any donkeys breaking their backs in this?" His friend snorts. "At least you won't break your back carrying it." The government's promise is written clear. These notes can replace cumbersome strings of coins. The notes are standardized, stamped and recorded, all overseen by the Jiaozi Hu, a special bureau created just to handle this paper experiment. A whole bureau just for ink and trust. You smell the starch of their crisp robes. Hear the stiff rustle of silk as they shuffle past, looking far too serious for men whose job is, essentially, legalized doodling. At the tea stall across the street, gossip drips as freely as the steam from the kettles. They say the government will limit the number of notes. One drinker whispers, slurping loudly. If too many flood the market, they'll be worth less than straw. Another leans in, tea breath hot on your ear. Historians still debate whether the first jiaozi were truly invented to ease trade, or simply a clever trick to solve a government shortage of copper coins. His friend waves him off. Historians, merchants, it's all the same. Everyone argues. Meanwhile, I just want to buy salt without hiring a mule. The unusual thing you discover is that the earliest notes weren't meant to last. They carried expiration dates like milk cartons, valid only for a few years before being exchanged for new ones. Imagine trying to use a gift card that suddenly decides to expire next Tuesday. You'd probably rage tweet it. But here, expiration is deliberate, a way for the state to control circulation. As you follow a clerk into a dim storeroom, the air heavy with mildew and dust, you see racks of paper hanging like drying laundry. Lanterns glow against their pale surfaces, each note brushed with characters so sharp they seem alive. The guard yawns near the door, spear leaning lazily against the wall while the clerk points proudly. Here the empire's wealth floats without metal. His voice trembles, half awe, half fear, as though he's showing you a dragon egg instead of fragile paper. Later, at a noodle shop, you overhear two peasants debating whether to accept jiaozi for grain. I prefer copper, says one, slurping broth. And drag it on your back all day? I'll take the paper, replies the other, wiping grease from his beard. What if it's fake? The first shrugs. Then I'll use it to wrap dumplings. The steam rising from their bowls smells of garlic and star anise, comforting in the cool evening. But their words hang heavier. Paper may be light, but the weight of belief decides whether it feeds or starves. Not far away, banners flutter in the market square as an official proclaims the new rules. His voice booms, amplified by the drumbeat of a wooden gong. Taxes may now be paid in jozi. The crowd reacts in waves. Some cheer, relieved at the thought of lighter burdens, while others groan, suspecting another clever trap. You feel the heat of bodies pressing close, the sweat of uncertainty mixing with the sweetness of candied hawthorn sold by a street vendor. A boy tugs his father's sleeve and asks, "Will this paper buy me a kite?" His father hesitates, then nods, but the pause says more than the answer. And beneath all this noise, history is quietly moving. This is the world's first government-backed paper money, a leap so bold it feels fragile. The streets smell of ink and possibility, the kind that makes merchants dream of freedom from metal, yet fear being shackled by decree. As dusk settles, you walk along Chengdu's city wall, watching lanterns blink awake in the haze. The wind rattles bamboo poles, carrying faint whispers of laughter and doubt. Below, a clerk locks the bureau's gate with a thud that echoes like a warning. You realize the jiaozi isn't just paper. It's an experiment balancing on the edge between innovation and disaster. And while it flutters lightly now, you sense storms brewing, where counterfeiters and skeptics will test whether paper can truly hold the weight of empire. You shuffle closer to the workshop, and the smell of damp pine resin and scorched lamp oil greets you before the door creaks open. Inside it is warm, almost uncomfortably so, because of the small braziers set near the benches, glowing with red embers that breathe soft heat into the air. The light is uneven, flickering and yellow, and it catches on curls of wood shavings that scatter like noodles across the floor. Every time a blade bites into the plank, the sound is sharp. Scrurk. Scrurk, as though someone is scratching at the belly of the earth. You lean against a beam polished smooth by too many shoulders, and you notice the artisans working here look more like monks than carpenters. Their heads are bowed, their lips pressed tight, their fingers tracing lines of carved characters as if each stroke were a prayer. One man mutters, "Careful, one wrong cut and it all goes to waste," and the younger apprentice beside him gulps so loudly it could double as percussion. If you've ever tried to type a password with someone staring over your shoulder, you know the stress, except here a single slip ruins a month of work. The block itself is larger than your chest, dark with soot-stained edges. Characters are carved in neat relief, every line backward so that when pressed, the paper will reveal them correctly. You tilt your head, your eyes straining to read the mirror writing, and chuckle quietly. It's like trying to understand your reflection when brushing your teeth half asleep. The smell changes as they heat the ink, thick and tar-like, in shallow ceramic dishes. There's a tang of pine smoke, sticky sweet, and the sour trace of fermented glue binding pigment. When the brush sweeps across the block, the bristles hiss faintly, and the characters darken to an oily shine. An official overseeing the process clears his throat with the importance of someone pretending not to be bored. "Make sure the seals are clear," he says. The carver sighs. Yes, clear as the sun." "Clearer," the official retorts, leaning forward. It feels almost comical, as though you're watching a bureaucrat micromanage an artist painting a fence. But here this fence is money itself, and every imperfection could turn into an accusation of fraud. A sheet of mulberry paper, thin, fibrous, smelling faintly of grass after rain, is laid gently across the block. A wooden bar, polished with use, presses down, and you hear a groaning squeak as if the plank itself protests. When the paper is lifted, the inked characters shine like fresh tattoos. People gather around, murmuring approval. Someone whispers, "It looks official now." Another mutters, "Official until someone forges it better." You stifle a laugh. That's basically the eternal problem of technology. Invent something brilliant, and immediately someone else invents a way to break it. A merchant with a plump belly waddles in, rubbing his hands together. "How fast can you make them?" he asks. "As fast as wood and ink allow," the printer replies flatly. The merchant sighs. "That's too slow. I could drink 10 cups of tea before you finish one stack." If only he knew what spreadsheets and office printers would one day look like. Endless, soulless stacks of paper that pour out faster than your patience with Excel formulas. At least here the slowness gives the notes gravitas. The artisans keep working, pressing note after note while the official notes each serial mark. You smell the mixture of sweat and hot lamp oil, hear the repetitive thunk-thunk of the press bar, and feel a strange hypnotic rhythm settle in. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows even though it's not dawn. It's just confused by the lamplight spilling through cracks in the shutters. You smile. The bird isn't the only one confused. Half the city is still arguing whether this paper can really stand in for copper or silver. Yet this is not only a story of paper and ink, it's tied to something much larger. You recall that in this very era, the Song Dynasty fought hard to resist invasions from the north. Their armies stretched and coffers drained. Metal for coins was hoarded for weapons, armor, and bribes to uneasy allies. Jiaozi, and the woodblocks that birthed them, weren't merely convenience, they were survival. Still, historians debate whether the officials understood just how unstable this system could become, or if they simply hoped the empire's prestige would paper over, quite literally, the risks. You run your fingertips over a discarded test sheet lying curled on the bench. The fibers scratch faintly at your skin, and you imagine how easily someone with skill could carve a counterfeit block. In fact, the lesser-known truth is that counterfeiters sometimes produce notes cleaner and sharper than the official ones, forcing the government to issue repeated warnings that too perfect notes might be fakes. Imagine being punished for doing too good a job, like being scolded for making your bed too neatly. As the night deepens, the workshop hums with effort. The officials keep count, the artisans keep carving, and the merchants keep demanding speed. Somewhere in the lull, you find yourself nodding at the irony. These notes, once born, would be lighter than feathers, yet heavy enough to shift the weight of an empire. You step outside into the cooler night air. The ink smell still clings to your nostrils, sharp and resinous, and the faint sounds of chisels and presses echo behind you. The moon is pale above the tiled rooftops, its face stamped in light like the round seal of heaven itself. And as you walk toward the riverbank, you can almost hear the currents whispering about what will come next. An era where paper spreads not just from hand to hand, but across provinces, as unstoppable as water seeking every hollow. The road turns and suddenly the noise thickens. Not the faint tap of chisels and brushes you left behind in the workshop, but the roar of commerce in motion. You stand before a large timber building, its wide eaves dripping rain from the morning drizzle, lanterns swaying faintly like tired heads. The plaque above the door reads simply, in bold characters, House of Exchange. Inside, the air is warmer than outside, filled with the mixed smells of wet robes, boiled millet porridge, and a surprising note of sandalwood incense that someone probably thought would make the place smell richer. It doesn't. It smells like money trying too hard to impress. You step through the crowd at the entrance. The floorboards creak beneath dozens of boots and straw sandals. Voices buzz in every corner, not unlike a modern stock market floor. except without the electronic tickers, just the tick of abacus beads sliding sharply under anxious fingers. You catch one clerk's hand moving so quickly over his abacus, it's basically the 11th century version of speed typing. A man with a thick beard waves a paper slip over his head. 3 strings of cash, he declares. 2.5, the clerk mutters back. The man groans. At this rate, I'll need to sell my mother's ox. Someone nearby chuckles. Sell your mother first, she eats more. The room ripples with laughter, thin but needed. You find yourself smiling despite the tension in the air. The House of Exchange is not just a bank, it's a theater. You hear coins clinking like tiny bells as merchants deposit heavy strings of copper, the cords creaking under the weight. The tellers weigh the coins on bronze scales, tapping the pans so that dust and small clumps of dirt shake off. The light glints on those scales, wavering gold in the smoky air, and you notice how some merchants squint nervously at every motion, as though the balance could decide their family's fate. You lean against a post sticky with candle wax strips, feeling the rough grain against your shoulder. From here you watch as jiaozi are written, stamped, exchanged. Some are fresh from the woodblock workshop, their ink still gleaming. Others are creased and soft, as though they've passed through too many sweaty palms. One old man licks his finger before smoothing the corner of his note, then tucks it carefully into a bamboo case strapped to his waist. It's as if he's handling a rare letter from a lover, rather than government-issued money. The clerks, however, treat the notes like a nuisance. Another? One sighs, pressing his brush hard into the registry. The squeak of brush on paper grates in your ears. His neighbor mutters, "They breed faster than rabbits." Outside, thunder rumbles distantly. The air grows humid, sticky, the smell of wet hemp ropes and soaked shoes sneaking in. You feel a drop of rain slip down the back of your neck through the doorway and shiver. Inside, the lanterns sputter as the damp air thickens. The House of Exchange feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for either prosperity or collapse. Amid this bustle, a storyteller in the corner has gathered a small crowd. His voice is hoarse, but his tale draws nods. He recounts how the emperor once decreed taxes in paper to save copper for war against the Khitan. You know this war, part of the endless Song struggle against the Liao dynasty, a widely remembered conflict that drained both coffers and patience. Here, though, the story isn't about strategy. It's about how soldiers at the frontier laughed when they were handed paper notes to buy their grain. Try feeding this to a mule, the storyteller rasps, holding up a fake note. See if it eats. You catch a glimpse of one unusual detail. In some houses of exchange, notes were issued with expiration dates. Yes, your money had a best before stamp, just like yogurt. After a few years, the note became worthless unless exchanged for a new one. You imagine standing at the counter arguing, but it's only one day past expiry. The clerk's face is stone. Rules are rules. Around you, voices swell again. A silk merchant waves his sleeve impatiently. Hurry, I have ships waiting on the Jinsha River. His voice is urgent, his perfume sharp, cloying in the stuffy room. The clerk raises an eyebrow. You'll have ships waiting longer if you don't sign here. The merchant snorts, signs, and slams the brush down, smudging ink on his robe. The onlookers laugh quietly, and you realize the House of Exchange is not just a financial hub. It's a crucible of trust. Every slip, every stamp, every sigh is a tiny performance in the drama of belief. Without trust, this entire wooden hall would collapse, not from termites, but from doubt. You wander toward the back, where smaller stalls buzz with quieter trades. Here whispers rise instead of shouts. 2 men lean over a table, one sliding a folded note across, the other weighing it with his palm as though touch alone could reveal its honesty. Is it good? One asks. The other smirks. As good as any these days. That's not exactly comforting. The smell back here is different, less incense, more ink and damp bamboo cases. Your fingers brush against one hanging from a hook, its lacquer sticky with humidity. You can almost taste the metallic tang of trust and suspicion in the air. Somewhere above the rafters creak, and you notice pigeons roosting. Their droppings splatter dangerously close to the registry scrolls. You think absurdly that even birds could undo this fragile empire of paper. And yet, despite all this fragility, the House of Exchange keeps humming. Abacus beads click, brushes squeak, copper clinks. Merchants grumble, clerks sigh. It's a song of commerce, slightly out of tune but persistent. Historians still debate whether these houses were more stabilizers or destabilizers, whether they expanded trust in paper or exposed its flaws. But as you stand here, the answer seems less about economics and more about theater. People believe because everyone else is watching them believe. The rain outside eases, leaving the world damp and glistening. You step back toward the doorway, the lantern glow behind you spilling into the wet street. The House of Exchange fades into the misty bustle, a place both ordinary and extraordinary, like a medieval bank crossed with a crowded tea shop. Part bureaucracy, part bazaar. As you walk down the slick street, the smell of wet earth and fried dough from a nearby vendor fills your nose. You can almost forget the weight of copper, the smell of ink, the press of bodies. Yet the thought lingers. If trust is this fragile, what happens when too many hands reach for too many notes at once? The drizzle has slowed to mist, clinging to your sleeves and hair like a damp second skin, and the street feels strangely lighter without the noise of the House of Exchange pressing against your ears. Yet the quiet doesn't bring comfort. Instead, every slip of paper you notice, peeking from a merchant's sleeve, folded neatly in a lacquer box tucked under a noodle vendor's counter, seems to breathe with unease. You catch the faint rustle of a note as a man passes, and it's as fragile as a moth's wing, a sound so small you wonder how it could possibly carry the weight of armies and taxes. And yet here it is, standing in for mountains of copper. You pause at a noodle stall, steam fogging your face, the smell of scallions, sesame oil, and pork bones filling the air so thickly you could almost eat with your nose. A farmer in a rough hemp tunic argues with the vendor. He slaps down a creased jowsey, the ink faded like an old tattoo. The vendor squints at it, turns it over, sniffs it, as if authenticity had a scent. "Is this real?" he mutters. "It came from Chengdu," the farmer insists, voice sharp. The vendor snorts. "So did half the fakes." The farmer groans, presses his forehead to the edge of the stall. "Then feed me first, argue later." The vendor sighs, ladles noodles into a bowl. "Only because I'm hungry too." You sit nearby, the bowl warming your hands, and realize that trust here is not in the note itself, but in the relationships, how much one man needs another, how much both crave hot broth on a damp night. The note is just theater. The noodles are real. The crowd thickens again. A silk-clad merchant struts past, his sleeves trailing dangerously close to your bowl, perfumed like an overwatered garden. He waves a crisp note at a cart driver, trying to rent space. The driver laughs, shakes his head. "Not unless you pay me in copper." "But this is government-backed." The merchant snaps. "So is my bad back," the driver shoots back. The laughter that follows is tinged with bitterness because everyone knows the system is fragile. And everyone is pretending it isn't. As you walk further, the smell of ink and damp hemp mingles with roasted chestnuts from a street brazier. You stop beside a pair of scholars debating so loudly their voices echo off the tiled roofs. "Paper is lighter than copper, yes," one insists, beard wagging like a brush. "It lets trade stretch across rivers without sinking the boat." The other shakes his head violently. "And what happens when bandits forge their own? Will the Empire feed us on trust alone?" You lean closer, hearing the creak of their bamboo chairs and the steady drip of water from a broken eave above. Their argument feels like the whole empire condensed, half the people convinced this paper is the future, half terrified it's an elaborate prank. Historians still debate whether the Song officials truly foresaw the risks of trust collapsing, or whether they were too dazzled by the convenience to see the cracks forming beneath. But here in the smoke and drizzle, it's less about debate and more about survival. A woman selling kites tugs at your sleeve, her hands stained with glue and dye. "Do you want one? Paper flies better in the wind than copper does." She grins, holding up a butterfly-shaped kite. Her joke lands lightly, but you hear the shadow in it. What else is paper doing in the wind these days? Flying, yes, but maybe flying away. Later, you step into a tea stall, the air heavy with jasmine and wet straw mats. The room hums with whispers. A traveler tells of a town upriver, where officials refuse to honor notes demanding copper instead. The listeners groan, sip their tea loudly, the bitterness filling their mouths. One mutters, "If they don't trust it, why should we?" Another replies, "Because we have no choice." The brazier pops, sparks leaping, the warmth sharp against your damp face. You wonder if fire feels the same about wood as people do about paper, useful until it burns. From the corner, a man jokes, At least with coins you can throw them at a thief. What do you do with paper? Fan him away. Laughter rolls, thin but desperate. Humor is the glue holding suspicion together, and you can feel it stretching. The night deepens, lanterns glowing with halos in the mist, the streets slick and shining like black lacquer. You watch a boy chase after his father, waving a folded jiaozi. "Can we buy sweets with this?" he asks eagerly. The father ruffles his hair. "If they'll take it, son. If they'll take it." The boy's face falls, and the note droops in his hand like a wilted flower. You can almost hear the Empire's heartbeat in that exchange. So much hope pressed into flimsy sheets, so much doubt stitched into every word. Trust is not a solid wall here. It's a paper lantern, beautiful in the dark, fragile in the rain. And as you walk on, the mist thickens again, softening the edges of tiled roofs and flickering lamps. The streets smell of wet ash, steamed buns, and the faint metallic tang of worry that never leaves. You drift forward through the misty evening, stepping out from the noodle stalls where the air clings heavy with broth and ink. The rain has slowed to a drizzle, enough to leave little freckles on your sleeves, but not so much that people scatter. Instead, the streets of Chengdu feel alive with murmurs of opportunity, rumor, and a kind of guarded optimism. Word spreads like steam rising from bamboo baskets that paper money is no longer just a local trick, but a policy stretching its fingers beyond these wet Sichuan valleys. You sense something shifting, like a traveling circus setting up tents in towns farther down the river, unsure if the audience will clap or boo. A scholar at the tea stall mutters, "They want this to spread beyond here, all the way to the capital." His tone is skeptical, but the way he holds his cup betrays curiosity. A farmer overhears and snorts, "Ha! Next thing you know, they'll ask us to pay our taxes in origami." The table chuckles, and you can't help picturing an imperial tax collector holding up a folded paper crane and saying, "This counts as 10 strings of cash." You wander through lantern-lit streets, and the glow paints the wet stone in streaks of saffron and crimson. There's a smell of roasted chestnuts mixed with damp straw, like the countryside has followed you into the city. Merchants are already debating the spread. Some are giddy with the thought of carrying paper instead of clunky copper, while others clutch at their robes as though someone just suggested carrying water in sieves. At the dockside, the Yangtze stretches wide and sluggish, ferry boats creaking as they prepare to sail eastward. Paper notes, neatly tied in little bundles, are tucked into lacquered chests ready for transport. The men lifting them grunt, more out of habit than weight, since these boxes are lighter than carrying bricks of coins. One worker smirks at another. "I could hide these under my pillow and not even wake my wife." The other replies, "Until someone steals it, and then you'll be sleeping on paper promises." The historical push behind this is unmistakable. Song officials, ever practical yet daring, know that Sichuan cannot remain the only theater of this experiment. They want the notes used along the great arteries of the empire, stretching toward Kaifeng, where imperial scribes dip their brushes under candlelight, drafting decrees that ripple outward like a pebble tossed in a pond. The dynasty itself is in a precarious spot, always juggling border threats and internal reforms. You hear in whispers the reminder of the Jin pressing north, and even echoes of the looming Mongol shadow that the Song have yet to reckon with fully. And yet, in the middle of military anxieties, they gamble with paper. One unusual fact you catch while lingering near a storyteller's corner: in some towns, people actually sewed paper notes into their clothing hems, thinking it safer than hiding coins. Imagine walking around like a badly constructed piñata, stuffed not with candy, but with expiring promissory slips. The storyteller, grinning with missing teeth, declares, "Historians still debate whether this was clever concealment or utter foolishness." The crowd laughs, though a few tug self-consciously at their sleeves, as though checking their own stitches. You join a caravan preparing to leave Sichuan. The smell of wet leather harnesses mingles with horse sweat, and the sharp bark of drivers cuts across the damp night. Torches flicker orange, snapping in the breeze, casting long shadows across wagon wheels piled with bolts of silk and paper bundles. A merchant sidles up beside you, pressing close against the drizzle. "Do you think it will work out there?" he asks. You shrug, pretending to know more than you do. "Depends if people trust it." He exhales, shaking his head. "Trust? That's thinner than paper itself." As the caravan lurches forward, the road is slick with mud, sucking at your sandals like clingy toddlers. The rhythmic creak of wheels and the clop of hooves become a lullaby of trade in motion. You smell pine from nearby hills, sharp and clean, mixed with the faint sweetness of wildflowers crushed under cart ruts. Farmers along the roadside wave, some laughing at the idea that notes from Sichuan will soon chase them down like traveling monks with donation bowls. One old woman cackles, "Paper is good for starting fires, not paying debts," and tosses a twig into her stove for emphasis. By day you pass checkpoints, where stern officials in stiff hats examine bundles with the suspicion of bouncers at an exclusive club. They hold the slips up to the light, tilt them, smell the ink even, as if their noses can sniff out fraud. The sun beats down hot, the scent of dust and horse dung mingling into something you wish you could unsubscribe from. Yet there's also a strange pride, an empire daring to carry its new invention across mountain passes, river ports and bustling trade hubs. At night, fires crackle under an open sky. Merchants gossip, roasting strips of dried fish that hiss over the flames. Someone jokes, "At least if the notes fail, we can use them to wipe our hands." Another pipes up, "Or our behinds." Laughter erupts, breaking the nervous air. You sit with your bowl of millet gruel, warm steam fogging your face, realizing how history often sounds less like destiny and more like a group chat of sarcastic travelers trying to make sense of bad Wi-Fi. When you finally approach a town beyond Sichuan, the streets feel narrower, the accents different, and the curiosity sharp. Children run up to stare at your group, their giggles high-pitched, their feet slapping against cobblestones. Shopkeepers lean out, their stalls stacked with dried persimmons, spices, and crude copper scales. A butcher wiping his cleaver asks, "What's that you carry?" And when shown a note, he squints unimpressed. Looks like my nephew's homework." Still, some locals show intrigue. A silk dealer fingers the edge of a note, rubbing the texture like a man testing fabric. "Strange," he says. "It feels official." He accepts one cautiously, like a person tasting a new dish at a potluck, unsure if it's seasoned well or poisonous. You sense how expansion is less about imperial decree and more about convincing hundreds of small moments like this. Each butcher, each silk seller, each farmer weighing trust against doubt. Everywhere you turn, the tension between belief and skepticism hums, a background static like the buzz of cicadas in summer fields. Expansion is messy, awkward, and full of contradictions, yet also strangely human. And as the night settles and the paper notes shuffle into hands that once clutched only coins, you sense that this experiment has stepped onto a bigger stage, and the drama is only just beginning. Because just beyond the next stretch of road, you'll see how expansion creates not only opportunity, but also new kinds of resistance, whispered in tea houses and muttered in tax offices, where no one likes being told what their money is worth. The road east pulls you onward, until the chatter of merchants and the groans of wagon wheels thin out, and in their place comes the sharper rhythm of drums and the rustle of silk banners. You're no longer among wet marketplaces and skeptical butchers. Now you find yourself brushing shoulders with officials in stiff robes, their boots clicking against flagstone like metronomes of authority. Ahead rises Kaifeng, the imperial capital, where a single brushstroke from the throne can shift the lives of millions. The air here smells less of chestnuts and sweat, more of incense burned in orderly courtyards, sweet and resinous, its smoke curling against the bright sky. Imperial endorsement is about to settle on the fragile invention you've carried across mountain roads, and suddenly you feel the weight of history pressing against the thinness of paper. The first sight of Kaifeng's city wall is overwhelming, an expanse of stone so tall and broad it looks as though giants stacked it block by block. Lanterns hang even in daylight, crimson globes swaying like restless hearts. The streets within are alive with the clatter of iron-shod hooves and the faint jangling of bells attached to officials' carriages. Compared to Sichuan's damp alleys, everything here feels brighter, faster, louder, like switching from an indie cafe playlist to a full stadium concert. You drift into an audience courtyard, swept by the tide of officials. The floor glitters faintly where quartz flecks catch the sun, and the air carries the waxy polish of sandalwood and the tang of lacquered screens. A clerk mutters near you, voice low but anxious. They're preparing an edict. The emperor will back the notes himself. Another shakes his head. Back them with what? Ink? Dreams? You stifle a laugh, imagining someone on a modern talk show rolling their eyes at this kind of innovation. When the decree is finally read, it feels less like sound and more like vibration through the crowd. The emperor declares that these notes, the Jiaozi and their successors, are now sanctioned by the highest authority of the land. Taxes can be paid with them. Soldiers can be supplied with them. Suddenly, the paper you watched farmers wrinkle their noses at has turned into state-backed currency. It's the medieval equivalent of getting verified with a blue check mark, instantly more legitimate, even if the content hasn't changed. A ripple moves through the courtyard. Some officials nod solemnly, like actors in a play who know their cues. Others look unconvinced, lips tight as if chewing bitter melon. A young scribe whispers to you as he clutches his bamboo case. Do you know what this means? No more hauling copper strings across provinces. One slip of paper could mean a fortune. You raise an eyebrow. Or one fortune could vanish with a slip. He blinks, then laughs nervously, as though you've said what he feared. The sensory overload of the capital makes the imperial endorsement feel even larger. From the palace gates, banners snap in the breeze, their vermilion dye so vivid it almost hums in your eyes. Drums roll as messengers scatter, their hoofbeats like hammer strikes echoing down stone avenues. You smell roasted duck from a nearby stall, its skin glistening as if mocking the dryness of paper notes. Everywhere the news spreads. The emperor has spoken, and what was once a regional experiment is now an empire-wide mandate. And yet, endorsement doesn't equal acceptance. You find yourself in a wine shop later that evening, the room thick with candle smoke and the sharp tang of rice liquor. Merchants gather in corners, voices hushed but heated. One says, "If the emperor accepts paper, we must accept it too." Another slams his cup down. Easy for you to say, "Will the emperor pay my debts when the paper fades?" The first shrugs, swirling his drink. Better faded paper than broken backs hauling copper. A third merchant, already tipsy, waves a slip in the air. "Ha! My children will draw cats on it before I trust it with my life." Laughter erupts, but it feels nervous, like the kind of laugh you give when your boss tells a questionable joke. The historical backdrop presses in again. This is the same dynasty that only decades earlier had faced devastating invasions by the Khitan Liao in the north, paying humiliating tribute in silk and silver. Now in the early 12th century, the looming Jin threat sharpens every decision. Endorsing paper isn't just about convenience, it's about survival. Moving vast amounts of resources quickly and flexibly could make the difference between keeping armies fed or watching borders collapse. And here's the odd twist. One lesser-known fact you overhear from a palace clerk is that some early notes actually carried tiny printed warnings, threats of punishment for counterfeiting that sounded more terrifying than half the empire's laws. Imagine a dollar bill today with "forgery punishable by eternal doom" scrawled across the top. Talk about motivational design. Historians still debate whether the emperor truly believed in the power of paper money or simply used it as a desperate tool, a grey-bearded storyteller tells you later by lantern light, his voice gravelly but steady. Belief or desperation, sometimes they look the same. He coughs, sips his tea, then adds with a grin, "And either way, you can't eat the notes." You notice how ordinary people react differently in Kaifeng compared to Sichuan. Here, the sheer proximity to imperial power makes acceptance faster, if not deeper. Shopkeepers glance at notes with a mix of awe and suspicion, like teenagers holding their first credit card. A noodle vendor ladling steaming broth says to a customer, "If His Majesty says it's money, it's money. But don't give me any damp notes, it'll dissolve in my soup." The customer snorts. "At least it'll add some flavor." In the great markets, the smell of spices, pepper, cinnamon, star anise hangs heavy, and paper slips trade hands alongside bolts of silk and jars of lacquer. You feel the friction between tradition and innovation, buzzing like cicadas on a summer evening. Copper still jingles in many purses, but notes flutter like nervous birds testing the air. Imperial endorsement has put wings on them, but whether they'll soar or crash remains uncertain. Night falls and Kaifeng glows under lanterns, strung like necklaces across boulevards. The stone streets shimmer in the reflected light, and the hum of voices never quite fades. You walk past a scholar lecturing under a portico, chalk scraping against a slate board. He declares, "This is civilization advancing, friends, a marvel to rival movable type." His students nod, though one mutters, "Marvels don't buy dumplings." You smile because that mutter might be the truest commentary of the day. The endorsement has happened. The notes are official, stamped not just with ink but with imperial will. And yet, as you drift through the night air scented with lotus and lamp oil, you sense the fragility hasn't vanished. It's only been draped in silken robes, given the blessing of drums and decrees. Tomorrow, caravans will carry news farther still, and the empire will brace itself for the awkward, uneven adoption of this strange invention. Because once the emperor's word has been spoken, resistance won't vanish. It will simply shift, finding new corners in which to mutter. And those corners, as you'll soon see, can grow into whole pockets of rebellion against the paper promise. You shuffle deeper into Kaifeng's lantern-lit arteries, and by now the clamor of debate over paper money has grown less theatrical and more conspiratorial. The emperor has declared, yes, that paper is as good as silver, but you can almost hear the scratching of 1,000 brushes in back rooms, each one trying to mimic the official script. The problem is simple. If slips of paper hold value, what stops someone from slipping extra into the stream? Your first sensation is sound, the muffled thunk of a wooden block striking inked paper. You lean closer to a shop where craftsmen are printing Buddhist sutras. The smell of ink is sharp, a little sour, almost like soy sauce left out too long. The paper itself is coarse, fibers poking out like hair on an old man's ears. You think if this same method can make holy words, it can surely make counterfeit cash. And you're right. Some clever folks already have. A student in plain robes whispers near you. They say entire bundles of fake notes were found in Sichuan. His friend chuckles. Maybe the ducks roasted their taste fake too. You smile, though you know counterfeiting was no laughing matter. To combat forgery, officials introduced notes with seals and multiple signatures. You imagine the imperial red stamp, pressed down with all the authority of heaven itself. The waxy smell of cinnabar paste lingers in your nose. Still, you notice merchants sniffing suspiciously at each slip, holding them against lamplight like modern shopkeepers, waving $100 bills at the ceiling. One elderly pawnbroker mutters, "Real notes glow differently." The fibers sing under fire. He waves a candle, and for a second you think he might torch someone's savings in proof. The paper curls at the edge, smoke rising like incense. You wince. The smell is halfway between burned rice husk and despair. Humor surfaces in unlikely places. A tea seller shakes his head. At least silver doesn't get soggy in the rain. Notes? They dissolve faster than tofu in hot soup. You recall the noodle vendor's joke from last night, and it feels as if the entire food industry has united in mocking money. Modern parallel. It's like everyone today agreeing that cryptocurrency is just fancy monopoly cash. Except here, the consequences could mean famine, revolt, or execution. Security measures became more elaborate. Officials embedded secret marks. Calligraphy flourishes only trained eyes could detect. One decree ordered that a certain type of hemp fiber be used, rare and expensive, so anyone lacking government mills would struggle to imitate it. You run your fingers across a sample pasted to the wall, feeling the rough, almost scaly texture. It's nothing like smooth silk, more like the surface of a luffa sponge. Historians still debate whether these measures worked consistently. Some argue the Song bureaucracy's obsession with seals and stamps gave commoners a false sense of safety. Others point out that widespread counterfeits eroded trust so badly that people hoarded silver again, undermining the very point of paper. A dialogue plays out before you in a small wine shop, smoky and warm with sweet rice liquor. Look here. This note's genuine, one merchant insists, slapping the paper on the table. His companion snorts. Genuine? You trust red ink more than silver in your palm? A pause. The first merchant replies with forced cheer. At least it's lighter than carrying a donkey load of coins. The second drains his cup, muttering, Lighter, yes. Easier to blow away in the wind, too. You feel the draft sweeping through the shop then, the crisp night air slipping under the bamboo blinds, making candle flames shiver. The fragile notes really could flutter away like moths if left unattended. The government responded with patrols. In markets you hear the stomp of soldiers' boots, smell the sweat under their armor, and watch as they unfurl scrolls describing penalties for counterfeiters. Exile, confiscation, sometimes even execution. The words echo with dread, yet the very existence of these punishments confirms how rampant the problem was. An unusual fact slides into your ear from a gossiping scholar. Did you know the earliest counterfeiters weren't greedy merchants but struggling monasteries? You blink. Apparently some temples short on funds tried printing fake notes alongside their sutras, justifying it as divine necessity. You imagine rows of monks chanting by day and slipping counterfeit bills through presses by night. Incense smoke mixing with ink fumes, a strange partnership of piety and forgery. Walking along the Qinhuai River, lanterns bobbing on black water, you notice men passing notes hand to hand with furtive glances. Their movements remind you of shady street dealers in modern films. Except instead of sneakers and hoodies, they wear embroidered belts and soft felt shoes. You half expect someone to whisper, "Psst, you want some rare hemp paper?" The sensory world keeps reminding you of fragility. The chill of damp night air seeping into your sleeves, the faint mildew smell clinging to bundles of stored notes, the metallic tang of ink-stained fingers if you accidentally brush a printer's hand. All of it feels temporary, unstable. A final conversation punctuates your night. You overhear a government inspector, stern-faced, confronting a stall owner. "Where did you get these notes?" The stall owner shrugs, sweat shining under the lantern glow. "A customer, same as any other." The inspector waves the note in the air. "The signature here is wrong. 3 strokes where there should be 4. The stall owner forces a laugh. Perhaps the calligrapher sneezed. The silence that follows is heavier than any drumbeat. By the time you leave, Kaifeng streets are quieter, yet the unease lingers. The empire has tried to wrap fragile paper in armor, stamps, fibers, threats, but the truth clings like damp ink. Every system invites shadows, and every shadow is waiting for a torch. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, whispers spread of new challenges, not of ink or fiber, but of hearts and habits. And soon, you will find yourself stepping into those very conflicts. You step back into Kaifeng's waking hum, and something has shifted. Where yesterday the talk was fear, today the tone is more practical. People may grumble. They may joke about notes dissolving in soup. But they also need to live, and living means adjusting. You sense that this is less about liking paper money and more about figuring out how not to get swindled while using it. The first sound that greets you is bargaining. Voices pitched high, layered like sparrows in an aviary. A vegetable seller waves a damp bunch of scallions, shouting, "2 notes for this." Only for a customer to counter, "1.5 notes and I'll take the roots too." The laughter of nearby children echoes. They're hopping between puddles with slips of paper folded into boats. It strikes you. Grown men fear counterfeits, and their kids are racing little banknotes down the gutter like toy yachts. Modern parallel? It's like children using their parents' credit cards to build Minecraft castles. Except here, the castles float away in the rain. The smell of frying oil wafts from a stall. You follow it and watch a woman selling sesame cakes. She tucks each note she receives under a heavy ceramic weight. She explains to you matter-of-factly. "If it's fake, the ink bleeds when it touches sweat. So I press it with heat and see if it smudges." She lifts the stone, shows you a faint stain, and shrugs. Half real, half fake. But stomachs can't wait for perfect notes. She pops a sesame cake into your hand, its crust crackling like tiny fireworks, warm enough to soften your palm. Adaptation takes many forms. Some shopkeepers keep bowls of water by their stalls. They dab the corner of a note to test its fibers. Others sniff the edges, claiming the hemp smells different when damp. One even runs his notes through the flame of a lantern briefly, watching the fibers glow. You think, this is like today's cashiers holding bills under a UV light, but with more drama and more chance of setting the till on fire. A man in embroidered shoes boasts to his friends, "I can tell a forgery by taste." He actually licks the edge of a note, smacks his lips, and declares, "Counterfeit ink tastes bitter." His friend snorts, "Or maybe you just swallowed last night's soy sauce." Everyone laughs. You gag quietly, because if licking money became a fashion, you definitely wouldn't survive here. Conversations bubble everywhere. At a wine shop you hear, "Brother, will you take paper for your pig?" "Only if I see silver tomorrow." Or the pig squeals in protest tonight. The first man grins. Then tomorrow silver, tonight wine. Cups clink and you catch the sour-sweet scent of millet liquor. It lingers in the air like a faint hangover waiting in ambush. A historical moment slides into the scene. The Song government, aware of rising distrust, began requiring that merchants in certain cities accept paper as valid tender. You feel the echo of this decree in the way transactions happen here. reluctant but steady, like a dance everyone has to join even if they don't like the music. And yet, in a lesser-known twist, people in remote villages often tore notes into smaller pieces to make change, treating them like silver coins could be clipped. You see this in front of you. A butcher carefully tears half a note, his cleaver slamming onto the wooden block, the smell of raw pork thick in the night air. He grins. Half a pig, half a note. Fair, isn't it? His customer nods, clutching the paper scrap like it's not absurd at all. You're struck by how quickly habits grow. What yesterday seemed laughable now feels routine. The weight of a folded note in a sleeve becomes as normal as carrying coins. You see young apprentices tucking slips into their hats, wives hiding them in silk purses that jingle no more. There's an odd quiet in the markets. Fewer clinks, more rustles, as if the city itself has traded one soundscape for another. The new music of Kaifeng is the whisper of paper rubbing against itself. Historians still debate whether this adaptation was true trust or just temporary convenience. Did the people genuinely believe in the notes, or did they merely play along until silver was within reach again? You suspect both answers are true, depending on whether you asked a noodle seller, a scholar, or a tax collector. Night deepens, lanterns swinging gently in the river breeze. You pass a family counting notes by lamplight, the glow making their fingers translucent. A boy tries to fold one into the shape of a crane, only for his grandmother to slap his hand and scold, "That bird costs rice?" He pouts, muttering, "It doesn't even fly." Her reply is sharp, "Neither do you if you waste our dinner." Adaptation spreads beyond the market. Inns start to charge more in paper than in silver, arguing that the risk deserves compensation. One innkeeper explains to a traveler, "For silver, the room costs 3 coins. 4 notes, 4, because tomorrow maybe they're worth nothing." The traveler groans, tossing the extra paper down, and the smell of damp wool from his cloak rises as he drops onto the bedding. An unusual fact catches your attention in the gossip of a scribe. Some people carried tiny balance scales, not for weighing silver anymore, but for weighing stacks of paper. The irony makes you chuckle. It's like modern folks carrying scales to measure the heaviness of their Wi-Fi signal. You stop at a tea stall where 2 scholars are arguing, steam rising from their cups like pale ghosts. "One day notes will replace all silver," says the first, eyes gleaming. The second smirks, "And one day pigs will recite poetry." The first retorts, "At least notes don't rust." The second sips his tea, adding, "Neither do pigs. Until they're salted." The stall erupts in laughter, and you can't help smiling into the steam. Through it all, you sense resilience. People are not simply victims of imperial decree. They improvise, joke, adjust. The smells of sesame oil, wet hemp, and river mud mix with laughter and suspicion in equal measure. Adaptation feels less like acceptance and more like survival, wrapped in sarcasm and practicality. And as you leave the lamplight behind, slipping into the hush of quieter alleys, you hear the faint rustle of notes in sleeves and pouches. They sound almost like leaves in wind, fragile, uncertain, but still moving forward. Somewhere ahead, you sense, this fragile adaptation will meet storms fiercer than counterfeiters or suspicious butchers. The next test waits not in markets, but in times of war and upheaval. You wake to the sound of cartwheels on stone, a rhythm that seems to stretch endlessly down the long artery of the empire. The morning air carries a bite, cool and sharp like the first sip of tea, while dust from yesterday's traffic still hangs low, stirred by passing hooves. You notice notes folded into pouches, tied with string, tucked in the belts of merchants riding eastward. What was once Kaifeng's curiosity now rolls out like a flood, reaching markets, river crossings, and provincial towns that had only known clinking silver and copper before. The scale feels different here. Where Kaifeng's alleys gave you gossip and jokes, these roads give you caravans heavy with bolts of silk and baskets of porcelain. The smell of lacquered wood mingles with horse sweat and the faint sweetness of dried persimmons packed for the journey. One driver mutters to another, "Do you trust these slips beyond the river?" "Not yet," comes the reply. But silver weighs too much, and paper doesn't break your mule's back. You can't help but think, this is the medieval version of switching from a brick-sized Nokia to a smartphone. Suspicion at first, but eventually everyone caves because it's lighter in the pocket. At a roadside tea house you sit among travelers. The room hums with steam and chatter, bowls clinking, the smoky tang of boiled greens filling the air. A merchant slaps a bundle of notes on the table saying, "Safer than carrying silver. No bandit wants paper." His companion scoffs, "Wait until they learn to read." Laughter follows, the kind that rattles against the bamboo walls. As notes spread, so too do rituals. You watch a ferryman refuse a soggy bill, tossing it back at the passenger like a dead fish. Another ferryman nearby accepts it with a grin, pressing it dry against his shirt and saying, "If it gets me wine tonight, it's good enough." It reminds you of modern vending machines, how one accepts your crumpled dollar with grace while the one next to it spits it back out like it's insulted. A widely known moment unfolds. The circulation of paper notes intensifies after Emperor Huizong's reign, partly out of necessity, as copper shortages bite into coin supply. You feel that pinch in the conversations around you. A blacksmith, hammer ringing in the cool air, grumbles, "They melt coins for statues and leave us with paper prayers." Sparks jump, glowing orange before vanishing into the twilight. But alongside this, you catch an unusual fact. In some provinces, local officials printed notes with expiry dates, promises that vanished after a few years. You imagine handing over your paycheck and hearing, "Spend it before it self-destructs." The smell of ink in these places becomes tinged with anxiety, as if every character stamped carries not just value, but a ticking clock. On a crowded boat drifting east, you share space with a scholar, his voice soft over the creak of wood. "These notes," he says, "they flow like water, yet water shapes stone." A farmer nearby interrupts, "Water also floods fields and drowns oxen." The scholar sighs, sipping his tea. "Then let us hope these notes do not flood us." The river air is damp and cool, beads of spray clinging to your sleeves, while the argument lingers like mist. Markets in new towns adapt in their own ways. In Hangzhou, you smell the sweet glaze of candied fruits while shopkeepers pin notes behind their counters like talismans. Some decorate them with brushstrokes, turning them into lucky charms. Others fold them into fans, snapping them open and shut to show off their wealth. One man even pastes notes on his wall like wallpaper, declaring, "Safer here than under the bed." His wife mutters, "Safer still if you didn't invite the neighbors to see." Historians still debate whether this widespread truly unified trade or fractured it with countless local experiments. From your vantage point, it looks like both. One town takes paper with smiles, the next demands silver with a scowl, and in between, travelers juggle both like circus performers. As dusk falls, you find yourself in a small town square. Lanterns swing, children chase each other with folded paper kites. The smell of grilled fish wafts over the crowd. A storyteller unfurls a scroll and declares, "Once men carried silver and bowed under its weight. Now they carry clouds that vanish if you sneeze too hard." The audience chuckles, though you notice more than one listener clutching their sleeve nervously where notes are hidden. The soundscape shifts from Kaifeng's constant murmur to something broader. Hoofbeats, river barges hammering on city gates. Paper has escaped the capital's walls and now breathes through the empire's veins. Yet everywhere you go, you hear that same undercurrent, excitement tinged with doubt, laughter masking unease. You end the night in a crowded inn, smoke curling from the brazier, warmth seeping into your bones. Merchants count their notes under flickering lamplight, and you realize that what began as fragile experiments in one province now travels farther than most men will ever see. Beyond the inn's wooden walls, you sense the currents of history pulling this fragile invention into even rougher waters, because soon, circulation won't just mean trade. It will mean war, shortage, and survival. You wake with the first crack of light pushing through the warped shutters of the inn. The smell of last night's cabbage stew still clinging in the rafters. The floorboards groan under the shuffle of merchants who stayed awake longer than you, their piles of notes half sorted, half crumpled, like a gambler's mess after a too long night. The sound is not the cheerful clink of copper coins. It's the papery rasp of hands rubbing dry, the frustrated sighs of men who realize that what they carried yesterday does not quite buy the same bundle of goods today. You rub your eyes, and before you've even stepped outside, you can feel it, something heavier than the morning mist hanging over the town, the strange weight of prices creeping upward. Outside, a hawker bellows over the din of roosters, 3 copper cash for a steamed bun, then corrects himself with a wince. No, 1 note if you please. The shift is awkward, like someone suddenly changing the rules of a board game mid-play. You glance at the bun in his basket. Smaller than yesterday's, tougher crust and yet costing more. It's the Song Dynasty's version of shrinkflation, centuries before potato chip bags with more air than chips. A merchant beside you mutters, "I swear 2 weeks ago one note bought me a full bowl of noodles. Now I get this sad lump." He prods the bun with a thumb as if testing for hidden gold. The air along the street feels jittery, like static before a storm. You hear children chanting outside a schoolhouse. Voices high and musical, but they compete with merchants shouting louder prices, trying to drown out the unease. A woman slams a copper scale onto a table, then waves a bill in the air, complaining, "This one feels thinner than the last batch. How do I know it's worth what you claim?" The smell of frying oil drifts across the square, mingling with ink and dust. But your stomach twists not from hunger, but from watching arguments spark like dry tinder. You follow a small crowd to a cloth stall, where bolts of silk gleam in morning light, shimmering with that peculiar silver-blue sheen. The stallkeeper announces, "Only with 3 notes now. Yesterday's price no longer possible." A customer grumbles back, "Do you expect me to carry sacks of worthless paper like a donkey?" His voice carries and laughter ripples through the bystanders. You can't help but smile at the donkey image. Though deep down you recognize the truth. Purses once filled with coins now replaced with bundles of notes that feel lighter, yet somehow burden more. One man, bold and red-faced, shouts, "If prices rise again tomorrow, I'll burn these papers in the street and cook my rice over them." His threat wins cheers, though you suspect he might actually try it. The notes do burn quickly, after all, like oversized kindling. Someone behind you whispers, "Careful, officials don't like that joke." You imagine a stern censor emerging from the shadows, like a humorless substitute teacher confiscating paper airplanes. Later, as you wander toward the riverside market, you overhear a pair of boatmen arguing about freight charges. "2 notes for carrying your grain," the taller one demands. "Yesterday it was 1. The shorter farmer protests. "Yesterday I wasn't paying double for lamp oil," the boatman fires back, his tone sharp. The boat's hull creaks with the tide as if sighing at the endless quarrel. You slip away, thinking that inflation doesn't just creep. It barges in like an uninvited uncle who eats all the snacks at a family gathering. By midday, the sun beats down on clay roofs, and the heat makes tempers flare sharper. The smell of horse manure and hot stone thickens the air, and you duck into a tea house for shade. Inside, smoke curls lazily from long pipes, and voices buzz like flies. At the next table, 2 men argue not over tea but over bills, spreading them flat with sweaty palms. "These are from Hangzhou," one insists. "Worth less here." "Worth less? They look the same," the other cries. The innkeeper chuckles and mutters toward you. They might as well argue over leaves. By the time officials print, the value's already running off like water downriver. His laugh has the weary edge of someone who has repeated this line too many times, and here comes your widely known event. Word arrives, carried by a dust-streaked courier, of battles at the northern front against the Khitan and later the Jurchen. War always needs funding, and the empire's hunger for resources presses against the already strained economy. Prices climb faster when rumors of defeat drift southward. Soldiers demand supplies, merchants hoard goods, and the common folk shoulder the cost. The courier drinks 2 cups of tea in one gulp and mutters, "Every mile I ride." The bread grows thinner. His horse, tied outside, stamps the dirt as though agreeing. Amid this, you stumble on a lesser-known fact. In some prefectures, officials printed expiration dates on notes, forcing holders to trade them back for fresh issues within a set time. A shopkeeper explains bitterly, "So you spend it quick or it dies like rotten fruit." He slaps a note onto the counter, where the printed date glowers like a deadline on an overdue homework assignment. You feel a twinge of sympathy. Currency with a built-in countdown feels more stressful than calming. As the afternoon deepens, shadows stretch across the streets, and you trail a procession of traders carrying bundles of cloth. The air smells of sweat, river mud, and roasted chestnuts sold from a brazier. You hear one trader sigh, "Every year we grow richer in paper and poorer in peace." His companion answers, "Historians still debate whether the state had any real control over the flood of notes, or whether it was like trying to herd geese across the sky." The line lingers with you, goose herding across clouds. as hopeless as holding sand in a sieve. You duck into another stall, this one selling spices. Cinnamon, star anise, and pepper scent the air so sharply it makes your nose itch. A customer sneezes into his sleeve and laughs. Worth more than silver and soon worth more than these notes. He flicks a bill as though it's a leaf fallen from a tree. The stall-keeper just shrugs. You notice the nervous twitch of his fingers. He too knows the value might crumble like stale bread. By evening, the lamps along the quay shimmer on the dark water. They're light, wobbly, and uncertain. You hear the low thrum of lutes from a wine shop and the bark of dogs prowling for scraps. At a noodle stall, the price has changed again. Chalk marks smudged and rewritten. 1 note more, the cook says casually, but his eyes flick to the growing crowd wary of anger. The broth smells rich and comforting, yet you hesitate, because every slurp feels like a tally in a larger game of scarcity. Across the river, you glimpse soldiers drilling in the torchlight, their armor catching fire like glints. You shiver in the cooling air, sensing that the Empire's heart beats harder now, pressed by hunger, war, and rising prices. The rustle of paper, once novel and almost playful, now sounds like dry leaves blowing toward fire. And as you walk back through the winding streets, you cannot shake the feeling that tonight's inflation is only the beginning, that darker storms of coin and ink wait just beyond tomorrow's dawn. The morning air is sharper than yesterday, colder on your skin as you walk the riverside. It smells of wet rope, tar, and faint wood smoke blown in from the north, a smell that seems to carry with it not just weather, but rumor. Soldiers stand at the edges of the market, their armor clinking as they shift uneasily, their presence like unsmiling punctuation marks in the chatter of merchants. You hear muttered words slipping from one mouth to another, like dry leaves skittering down the street. The Khitan, the Jurchen. They're moving south again. The names have weight, the way a storm's name does when you hear it on the radio today. Except here there's no evacuation plan. Just raised prices and sleepless nights. A farmer beside you haggles over salt, his voice rising in frustration. If the Northerners raid again, no one will care about your notes. He snaps at the stall-keeper, holding up a creased bill that trembles in his hand. The stall-keeper fires back. Then buy now before salt costs more than gold. Their argument prickles in your ears as soldiers glance over, uninterested in commerce but alert for dissent. The air feels heavier with each word, as though the sky itself presses down, aware of the armies pacing just beyond the Empire's horizon. You remember what the courier muttered yesterday, bread growing thinner the farther he rode south. Now the chatter thickens with details. Khitan horsemen in fur cloaks, Jurchen banners flickering like fire on the wind, and villages emptied before dawn. The Song Empire may have invented paper notes, but horses with bows and torches couldn't care less about innovations in finance. You stop near a map seller's stall, parchment sheets curling in the breeze. One map is blotched with ink circles showing fortresses along the frontier. The seller, an old man with a thin beard, taps a shaky finger against the line of the Yellow River. They crossed here once, and here. His voice lowers, conspiratorial. They'll do it again. The Empire keeps printing paper, but the North prints warriors. He chuckles darkly at his own joke. You think it's not far from the modern equivalent of someone saying, they've got missiles, we've got memes. Comforting, in a very non-comforting way. Further down the street, drums thud in the distance. The vibration carries through the ground and into your ribs, dull and menacing. You picture war horses stamping on frozen ground, the clash of metal echoing into forests where even birds fall silent. In the markets, people echo that tension, voices sharper, tempers quicker, prices climbing as though trying to outrun their own fear. At a tea house doorway, 2 men lean close over steaming cups. The Jurchen are stronger than the Khitan, the first whispers. Nonsense, the other retorts. The Khitan ruled the steppe long before. They pause, then both laugh nervously, as though realizing that neither answer is comforting. You sip your own tea, bitter with overused leaves, and notice how the conversation around you is less about flavor and more about survival. And here comes your widely known event, the fall of the Northern Song's capital. Kaifeng in 1127, the Jingkang incident, though for you in this moment it hasn't yet happened. Still, whispers carry news of border defeats, lost garrisons and refugees streaming south with faces grey from smoke and frostbite. A scholar at the table beside you mutters, if they reach Kaifeng again, paper notes won't matter. Ink cannot stop arrows. His tone is grim, but his words hang like prophecy. As you step outside, the wind cuts sharper, carrying dust that stings your eyes. You pass a blacksmith hammering horseshoes, the clang echoing down the street, sparks flying bright against the gloom. The smell of hot iron mixes with sweat and ash, and you think of how every hammer strike feels like a heartbeat of the empire, loud, steady, but strained. A boy nearby fans the forge and asks, "Father, will the Jurchen come here?" The blacksmith grunts, "Not if we shoe enough horses." You can't tell if it's reassurance or denial. Later, by the city wall, you see watchmen adjusting lanterns as dusk thickens. The torches flicker in the chill, flames straining in the gusty wind. A soldier nearby inspects a handful of notes, scowling. "Useless on the frontier," he mutters. "Try paying a Jurchen raider with this. He'll wrap his fish in it before he laughs." His comrade grins and replies, "Then better we pay them with arrows." They both laugh, though their eyes remain watchful on the horizon. Among the bustle, you stumble upon a lesser-known fact. In some garrisons, soldiers were partly paid in paper notes instead of grain or coin. The irony isn't lost on you. Imagine marching into a freezing northern night with only slips of ink-stamped paper to show for your service. A retired soldier selling cabbages shakes his head at you, grumbling, "Notes can't fill a belly. We burned them once in the snow just to keep fingers alive." His hands, thick and scarred, seem to remember every frost-bitten night. The city buzzes louder as lamps are lit, pools of light quivering on cobblestones slick with frost. You catch snatches of song from a wine shop, the smell of fermented rice drifting sweet and sour through the air. Inside, a storyteller spins a tale of ancient heroes, raising his arms dramatically as listeners cheer to distract themselves from the present. But even here, conversation circles back to the north. A patron interrupts. "Tell us how they'll be defeated, not how they came." The storyteller chuckles. "Ah, but what's a story without tension?" You smirk. Clearly this man would have done well in modern cinema trailers. The night deepens and the temperature drops until your breath shows pale in the lamplight. You walk through a narrow alley where shadows stretch long, listening to the creak of shutters as people bar their homes. Somewhere a dog howls, long and mournful, carrying far in the crisp air. It blends with the faint clatter of hooves on stone, patrols circling like restless guardians. You hug your arms tighter, the chill biting through cloth, and imagine that this cold is just a whisper of what soldiers face in the north. Passing a granary, you see guards posted outside, their spears glinting. One spits into the dirt and says to his fellow, "Better guard rice than guard notes." The other shrugs. But rice can rot, notes only rot in value. Their laughter is short, cut off by the sound of a horn call echoing across the city wall, deep and resonant. It makes the hairs on your neck rise. The sound is both a warning and a reminder. The threats are real, and they are near. Historians still debate whether the Song Dynasty's reliance on paper currency made them more vulnerable in times of war, when trust faltered and soldiers demanded substance over symbols. But walking these streets tonight, you feel the answer in the anxious shuffle of merchants, the mutters of soldiers, and the restless beat of drums carried on the cold wind. And as you find your way back toward the inn, notes tucked carefully yet nervously into your sleeve. The night seems longer than usual, stretched taut by whispers of armies riding under the same moonlight. You sense that while inflation hurt the purse, it is the northern threats that will soon strike at the empire's very heart. The morning after feels different, not just cold but hollow, as if the city itself has exhaled and forgotten how to breathe back in. Smoke trails thinly from chimneys, hesitant as though the households beneath are unsure whether to cook, pack or flee. You hear the muffled sound of wooden wheels bumping over cobblestones, cart after cart creaking under piled bedding, jars of pickled vegetables, and children clinging to baskets like extra cargo. The air smells of damp straw, unwashed clothes, and panic. At the market gate, someone mutters, "They're coming closer." Another voice answers, "South is safer." You watch as the words ripple through the crowd like a dropped pebble in water, except here the ripples drag entire families away. Paper notes flutter in the wind as merchants count hurriedly, deciding what to take and what to abandon. One woman stares at her handful of bills, then stuffs them into a clay jar as if burying treasure. You wonder if, 100 years from now, someone will dig it up and laugh at how much money was worth so little. It's basically the medieval version of finding a drawer full of blockbuster coupons. The clatter of hooves jolts you back. Soldiers ride past, their armor frostbitten, faces drawn. One calls to the crowd, "Stay calm, stay orderly." His voice cracks on the last word and the crowd doesn't miss it. Orderly isn't exactly the mood when people are tying chickens to carts and yelling at their grandmothers to hurry up. You edge closer to a family loading sacks onto a donkey. "Where will you go?" you ask. The father, sweat already freezing on his brow, replies, "As far as rice will take us." The mother snorts, tugging at the donkey's rope, "Which isn't very far if you keep talking." They both laugh for a heartbeat, thin, brittle laughter that shatters as quickly as it comes. Walking along the riverbank, you see barges packed tight with people. Cargo abandoned on shore because space now sells for weight in silver or notes if the boatmen are generous. A ferryman shouts, "2 strings of cash or 20 notes." A merchant protests, waving his bills, "These are worth more than that." The ferryman spits into the river and growls, "Not on water they aren't." The argument dissolves when another desperate family shoves forward, pressing their coins into his hand. The boat lurches under the strain of bodies, the waterline frighteningly close to the edge. You smell the sharp tang of river mud stirred up by the current, mingled with sweat and fear. It's here you recall the widely known event, the Jinkang incident of 1127, when Kaifeng fell to the Jurchen and the northern Song court fled south, leaving behind a capital swallowed by fire and looting. You're not there yet in this story, but the shadows of that catastrophe are lengthening fast. Refugees already mirror what's coming. Long trains of carts, children crying in the cold, banners of the dynasty trampled in the mud. And then comes a lesser-known fact. Not only people fled, but whole workshops for printing notes were dismantled and moved south. Imagine the frantic dismantling of wooden blocks, inkstones and paper bundles. An empire literally packing up its money-making machines as if they were family heirlooms. A harried clerk stumbles past you with a sack of carved blocks on his back, muttering, "If the notes don't follow us, no one will believe we still rule." His words hang in the frosty air, absurd and true at the same time. As the day wears on, the city grows emptier. Shop shutters bang in the wind, some still scrawled with chalk prices that mean nothing now. A noodle stall simmers broth that smells of star anise and garlic, but no one stops to buy. Its steam curls into the air like a ghost of comfort that no one can afford. The cook stirs angrily and mutters, "All this for nothing. Notes won't feed me if everyone leaves." He ladles broth anyway, stubborn against the tide. You're half tempted to sit and order, just to feel normal. But the tide of movement carries you along. You notice children dragging toys, wooden tops clattering on the ground, dolls losing limbs in the shuffle. A girl clutches a paper kite painted with bright red wings, holding it close like it might lift her family away. Another child lets his toy wheel roll off into the mud, staring blankly after it, as though realizing he's too old now, suddenly aged by necessity. By dusk, the lamps along the main avenue flicker against a gusty wind. The air tastes of soot and cold metal. You hear the low drone of horns on the wall, not in warning this time, but in weary acknowledgement. The exodus is real, irreversible. Families press southward in lines stretching beyond sight, the sound of their footsteps like waves grinding stone. You walk beside a scholar clutching scrolls tight to his chest. "Why carry all that?" you ask. He glares at you. "Knowledge weighs less than rice and it cannot spoil." Then he softens, half smiling. "Besides, one day someone might care again." His voice is gentle, but the way he clutches those scrolls makes you think of someone clutching a laptop charger during a blackout. Irrational, but also completely understandable. Later that night, in a crowded inn overflowing with refugees, the air is thick with damp wool, garlic breath, and wet straw. You wedge yourself between a farmer and a potter, both muttering about coin. The potter scoffs, "These notes will burn before they buy me clay again." The farmer answers, "Burn them then, I'll trade rice for the ashes." They both laugh, brittle but real, easing the suffocating air for just a moment. And here's the academic sting. Historians still debate whether the southward flight truly saved the dynasty, or merely postponed collapse. Some argue that moving south preserved culture, economy, and governance. Others claim it fatally weakened the empire's legitimacy. Walking among these people, their carts rattling southward, you realize that for them there's no debate. It's survival, not theory. As dawn threatens again, you step onto the southern road. It smells of churned mud and crushed weeds, the air moist with river mist. Behind you, Kaifeng sinks into silence. Ahead, endless roads and riverways unwind toward Hangzhou, toward uncertainty, toward survival. The shuffle of thousands of feet blends into a kind of lullaby, ragged, desperate, but steady. The sound of an empire moving itself like a caravan animal, driven by fear and necessity. And in that rhythm, in that southward march, you sense the next chapter already forming. A world rebuilt in new cities, on new rivers, under new skies, where paper money must find its voice again. You hear the splash of oars in the river at dawn, the rhythmic dip and pull that sounds like a giant breathing. The new capital in the south is still rubbing the sleep from its eyes, Hangzhou fog draped across the canals like sheer curtains. The air is damp and heavy, carrying the smell of wet wood, frying scallion cakes, and a faint sourness of fish left too long in baskets. You walk slowly, shoes darkening from dew on the planks of a bridge, and see boats bumping against each other, each loaded with crates, sacks, and sometimes even cages of chickens that cluck, as if they're personally offended by relocation. You know the feeling, being uprooted, shuffled, and set down somewhere new. Except instead of feathers, you're carrying the invisible weight of paper promises. The court has dragged its printing blocks south, and with them comes the frantic question: how do you rebuild an empire's trust when your treasury is now a collection of soggy notes, expired bills, and memories of Kaifeng's fall? You hear whispers in the marketplace of new issues and shorter terms, the phrases fluttering like startled birds. Officials in lacquered hats talk of restamping notes with fresh seals, as if legitimacy is just a matter of ink applied firmly. It's like watching someone slap duct tape on a sinking canoe. Optimistic, maybe, but you're not planning to bet your rice on it. One stall holder, a wrinkled man selling bamboo baskets, squints at the latest paper bill offered to him. "Will you take it?" asks the nervous buyer. "Take it," the seller mutters. "For what?" "For kindling, for wallpaper, for chasing flies." He waves the slip in the air like a fan. The buyer protests, insists the government has guaranteed its value, and the old man chuckles. "Then let the government eat these baskets." You move along and see another exchange, this time less comical. A young woman clutching an infant begs a salt dealer to accept her notes. He sighs, scratches his beard, and finally nods. "Fine, but I'll need 2 of those for 1 bag." Ink doesn't boil water. The child sneezes, the paper flutters, and you feel how fragile survival has become, measured not in coins, but in paper that's losing its spine. The widely known event hangs over all of this. The Jingkang incident has carved its scar into memory. The northern song has collapsed. The southern song is the fragile reed standing now. Everyone you pass carries that weight in their posture, their faces etched with both relief at being alive and dread at what's next. Yet amidst this ruin, the empire experiments again. Officials are drafting new kinds of promissory notes, ones that expire after shorter terms. It's a clever attempt to stop hoarding, but to ordinary people it feels like milk with an even shorter expiration date. You buy it, and by the time you're ready to drink, it's gone sour. What's unusual, and you catch it in the whispers of clerks near the yam offices, is the introduction of regional notes, Hangzhou issues, distinct from those in other prefectures. It's as if each province now has its own monopoly money. Travelers shuffle through their purses, frowning. "Is this one good here?" they ask nervously at taverns. Some innkeepers shrug. "Maybe. Depends if I like your face." This patchwork currency turns markets into guessing games, and your head spins imagining if each modern city block required a different app for your bank card. Historians still debate whether these southern experiments were ingenious or desperate, a sign of adaptability or proof of the system's unraveling. But in the streets, theory doesn't matter. You step into a tea house where candles smoke in the damp air, dripping wax like slow tears. The chatter inside is heated. One scholar insists paper is the future. The other thumps his ceramic cup and argues nothing beats silver. Their voices rise, and finally the owner interrupts, joking. "If either of you pays me with arguments, you'll be washing dishes." Laughter ripples, brief but real, easing shoulders bent by worry. You feel the texture of one of the new notes when a passing official hands you a sample. Its fibers rougher than before, the ink darker, perhaps meant to look more serious. See, he says, these cannot be forged easily. You notice the corners already curling from the humidity. You're tempted to reply that the real problem isn't forgery but faith. But you just nod, smile, and slip it into your sleeve where it feels like little more than a fragile leaf. On the docks, barge owners haggle fiercely. One shakes a crumpled note at another. This was worth a load of millet last month. Now it buys half. Tomorrow, a bowl of rice husks? The other man shrugs. At least it's lighter to carry than a sack of coins. A small boy listening pipes up. So lighter means better. The barge owner snorts. Try eating it, little one. The boy pretends to chew a corner. Everyone laughs, but the humor tastes hollow. Like broth stretched too thin, as night falls, lanterns flicker along the canals. Their orange glow doubled in the water. You smell fried fish mixed with river mud, hear crickets competing with the slosh of oars, and sense the city trying to stitch itself into something whole. Officials work late, scratching their brushes across paper, issuing orders for yet another experiment. Some propose pegging the paper strictly to coin reserves. Others dream of grand southern banks, institutions that will stabilize faith. It's easy to see ambition in their gestures, but you also feel the weariness of men trying to paint over cracks in the wall while the foundation shifts beneath them. Through the night, the printing shops hum. Wooden blocks press onto damp sheets, stacks drying under lamps. The air thick with the scent of ink and scorched oil from lamps that refuse to be trimmed. You imagine sleeping beside that sound, the thunk of the press, the whisper of paper peeled free, and wonder if centuries later it might be the same lullaby as a distant printer spitting receipts in a gas station. The machinery changes, but the hum of bureaucracy is eternal. By the time dawn comes, you've wandered far. You see a monk watching the sunrise over the West Lake, his robe catching the pink glow. He murmurs, paper, coin, wood, stone, it is all passing. You half expect him to turn and reveal a credit card machine tucked under his sleeve, but instead he only smiles, palms pressed together. In the stillness, you realize the Southern Song's gamble is not just finance, but faith. Faith that ink on paper can still command loyalty, trade, and maybe even survival. And as the wind lifts across the water, carrying the rustle of drying notes from the presses, you sense that the story isn't finished. There will be bolder moves ahead. Experiments so audacious they border on reckless, like bridges built midstream. And soon you'll step into one of those bold chapters, where finance stretches itself into unfamiliar shapes, chasing stability it may never quite catch. The bells of Hangzhou's morning watch echo faintly, hollow in the mist. You wake to their bronze thrum, the sound carrying through damp alleys that smell of wet moss and boiled millet. Candles sputter in upper windows, dripping wax like tears that harden before hitting the sill. You step into the street where carts creak under sacks of rice, and you hear the steady slap of sandals on stones polished by rain. The air is cool, damp enough that your sleeves cling to your skin. It feels like the city itself is wrapped in a wet blanket, muffling even laughter into softer tones. Yet under this quiet surface, you catch the restless murmur of an economy walking on eggshells. Paper notes still flutter from sleeves, their corners curled by humidity, their worth questioned in whispers. Each bill feels less like a guarantee and more like a dare. You pass a fishmonger, who holds up a fresh carp with one hand and a crumpled slip with the other, muttering, "One swims, one sinks. Guess which feeds my family?" The man next to you chuckles and replies, "At least the paper doesn't smell." The fishmonger snorts. "Not yet." You trail along to a tea stall where a group of scholars in worn robes are already arguing, their cups steaming with bitter green leaves. One says, "The empire must enforce stricter controls, less printing, tighter redemption." Another shakes his head. "Without more notes, trade will suffocate. Better to have fragile breath than none at all." The owner interrupts, wiping the counter. "Pay first, argue later. Your theories don't boil water." You smile. It's the second time this week you've heard someone use boiling as the ultimate test of currency. It seems a pot of rice is the true central bank. The fragility of paper is everywhere, not just physical but emotional. The Southern Song has survived its northern catastrophe. The Jingkang incident is now a scar in memory, but the lessons are written in each nervous glance at a market stall. Soldiers remember being paid in notes that no one wanted. Families remember burning wages to keep warm. Trust, once cracked, rattles like pottery repaired with too much glue. Still, there's an unusual experiment unfolding. Merchants begin issuing their own private bills, little slips backed not by the state, but by reputations of guilds or shops. You find yourself holding one stamped with a rice merchant's seal, its ink shaped like a stalk bending under grain. A passerby tells you, "This one, safer than the government's, at least the rice is in his storeroom." It feels odd to think of shopkeepers running a parallel central bank, but here you are staring at currency backed by something tangible. Barrels of food you can actually smell when you pass the shop. Historians still debate whether these private issues helped stabilize trust or only deepened the sense of fragmentation. For the people using them, though, the debate is simple. Does the paper get me rice, salt, or tea? If yes, it lives. If not, it's dead. As you walk deeper into the city, you sense the fragility mirrored in architecture. Houses lean at angles patched with mismatched wood. Lanterns swing above doorways, their silk shades frayed at the edges, glowing orange but weak against the heavy fog. Fragility becomes almost aesthetic, like the city itself is learning to balance beauty atop cracks. You smell chestnuts roasting in iron pans, hear vendors calling out in sing-song voices, and yet each note of commerce has the timbre of anxiety beneath it. At a cloth stall, you overhear another sharp dialogue. A buyer frowns, holding a bill. "Will this get me a length of silk?" The vendor folds arms. "Depends, do you want silk for wearing or silk for imagining?" The buyer sighs. "Imagining, perhaps. My wife will accept that." They laugh, but the vendor still demands 2 notes instead of 1. You notice the buyer pays anyway. Fragility does not stop trade. It only makes it wobble. There's one widely known event that hovers here like a shadow. The empire's decision to move its capital permanently to Linnan, Hangzhou, embracing the south as its future. It's survival, yes, but also concession. A lesson that not all losses can be reversed. You walk the stone streets knowing every banner overhead, every slip of paper exchanged, every song drifting from a boat on the canal. All of it is the product of that choice to endure fragility rather than collapse completely. A lesser-known fact trickles to you in a conversation, with a clerk balancing tall stacks of records. He whispers, "Did you know? Some early notes were deliberately printed with expiration dates, so people would have to exchange them. Like milk with a clock ticking." He grins wryly. "Imagine being paid in bread that molds tomorrow." You laugh, uneasy. It's not a joke, but it feels like one. Later that evening, as the mist thickens into drizzle, you take shelter under an awning where oil lamps sputter, their smoke curling like faded calligraphy. Children chase each other, their laughter sharp and clear, momentarily lifting the air. A grandmother hands one child a note to run an errand. The boy waves it like a flag, and you wonder if he knows he's holding both a promise and a warning. The lesson of fragility settles in your bones as you drift along the canal. Water laps against stone, carrying fragments of lantern light. Fragility is not weakness here. It's adaptation, like bamboo bending in the wind. The Southern song cannot erase its losses, but it learns to live lighter, to trust not permanence but flexibility. Paper money, brittle as it is, embodies that spirit, easily torn, easily burned, but also easily made again. You pause by the riverbank where fishermen mend nets. One points to your sleeve where a note peeks out. "Careful," he says with a grin. "If you drop it in the river, even the fish won't bite." His friend chuckles. "So unless the fish are literate," you laugh along, though the comment stays with you. Currency depends on belief, and belief is as slippery as fish in dark water. By the time you return to your inn, the streets are wet with rain, glistening under torchlight. You smell damp earth and hear the squeak of wagon wheels heavy with grain. The city breathes slower, wrapped in fragile trust stitched together by humor, necessity, and hope. And as you blow out your lamp, you sense that fragility itself has become a teacher, reminding the empire that every system is breakable, and that survival means bending before breaking. Tomorrow will bring sharper lessons still, as paper money swells once again beyond its frame, inflating like a lantern too full of air, ready to burst. You linger beneath the dripping eaves of Hangzhou, rain trailing off roof tiles like threads that refuse to snap. The drizzle has not stopped, and neither has the rhythm of your steps through the streets, soft, hesitant, almost as if the stones themselves have grown accustomed to your wandering. A child runs by, clutching a damp paper note above her head as though it were a victory banner. Though it folds and droops in the moisture, she laughs. and for a moment you hear the sound bounce off the walls, stretching farther than the narrow lane itself. It feels less like a child's laugh, and more like an echo meant for someone centuries ahead. Someone like you. Listening now long after the song has faded, the smell of roasted chestnuts returns, though this time weaker, mixed with wet ash from a fire gone out. You catch yourself wishing for a modern umbrella. Maybe one of those absurd neon ones that make you look like a walking glow stick at a festival. But here, your sleeve is all you have, and it sticks damply against your wrist. A passing merchant shakes his head at the soggy bills in his hand and mutters, "At least the carp still swim." You can't help but think of that fishmonger's joke from before. Apparently, carp have become the unofficial mascot of skeptical merchants. Your ears prick up at the hollow toll of a temple bell further away. The sound is slow, patient, and for a second you imagine it as an ancient notification ping, except instead of alerting you to another pointless app update, it reminds you of centuries passing, paper crumbling, and ideas outlasting their creators. A scholar with ink-stained fingers sidles beside you, sighing heavily. "Paper money fragile as rain on silk," he murmurs, half to himself, half to you. "But what choice does the dynasty have?" You nod politely, unsure whether he expects an answer. He glances your way and adds with a smirk, "Gold doesn't grow on trees. Paper does." Then he shuffles off, sandals slapping softly against puddles. Later that night, you duck into a tea shop glowing faintly with oil lamps. The air is warmer here, thick with steam and the fragrance of oolong. A circle of merchants lean close over a damp tabletop, paper notes spread out like cards in a modern poker game. One man flicks the corner of a soggy bill and mutters, "Worth less than wet laundry." Another replies, "Better than no laundry at all." They chuckle, though there is a weary edge in it. You sip your tea, hot and slightly bitter, while thinking this could almost be a scene from your local cafe, except instead of arguing about Wi-Fi speed, they're worrying whether tomorrow their notes will still buy rice. Historians still debate exactly how much trust truly flowed through these fragile slips. Some records describe flourishing markets, buzzing with optimism. Others whisper of counterfeits so convincing that even officials couldn't tell the difference. One lesser-known fact drifts through your thoughts. The government once tried embedding special fibers and seals into the notes, the medieval ancestor of holograms and watermarks. Imagine a song craftsman carefully pressing patterns into pulp, centuries before anyone dreamt of a credit card chip. The night deepens, lamps dim and the streets empty until only you remain, walking through the soft hiss of drizzle. A beggar crouches under a sagging awning, holding out a palm where no coins jingle, only a crumpled note, limp and unreadable in the dark. He looks up and mutters, "Will this feed me tomorrow?" His voice cracks and you find yourself without an answer. You pass him quietly, the sound of your breath blending with the mist. Far away on the Empire's borderlands, battles still rage, Jin horsemen clashing with Song defenders. You cannot hear them from here, but their presence lingers like thunder over the horizon. It is a reminder that currency is only as stable as the ground under one's feet, and this dynasty's ground shakes often. And yet, in this fragile balance, there is a strange resilience. You imagine how centuries later, explorers and merchants will stumble upon these notes in old chests, marveling at the audacity of an empire that trusted paper to carry value. The idea will not vanish. It will ripple outward, inspiring experiments in faraway lands until one day, even your own wallet carries its echo. The drizzle slows. Lanterns gutter out. You stand on a stone bridge, watching the black river glide beneath you. The paper bills of the market are gone now, tucked into sleeves, hidden in chests, forgotten in rain barrels. But the idea lingers, like the faint smell of ink that clings to your fingertips. You sense that you are not simply standing in Hangzhou's night. You are already drifting forward through centuries, carried quietly by the very paper that once fluttered like weak wings. The bell tolls again, softer now, stretched thin by fog, and you let the sound fade, slower and slower, until it seems to melt into the rhythm of your own breath. Your steps falter. Your shoulders loosen. The echo of centuries does not rush, it lingers unhurried, like a bedtime story that knows it has reached its end. So you let yourself rest here, in the hush of drizzle and distant bells, the paper dream folding itself gently around you. End of script. Sweet dreams.